welcome to Brazil, the largest country in South America. Here are three of its most significant cities: the nation's capital in Brasilia, its commercial capital, Sao Paulo, home to more than 21 million people, and its cultural capital, Rio de Janeiro, with more than 12 million. Our focus here is on culture. What better introduction to Rio is there than a visit to the most famous beach in the world, Copacabana, with its distinctive mosaic pavement in black and white marble that stretches for 2.5 miles. We were here in February of 2023 as part of a Vantage tour group, eager to soak up Rio's lively culture. This being summer in the Southern Hemisphere, Rio's celebrated beaches such as Copacabana and Ipanema were attracting locals and tourists alike. And yes, the girl from Ipanema goes walking. We were struck by the amazing blend of people, not just blacks and whites, but every shade in between. Since Brazil was originally colonized by Portugal, the official language is Portuguese. So whites of European origin make up almost 50% of the population today, and Afro-Brazilians comprise nearly 8%. But that leaves more than 43%, almost half the residents, being of mixed ethnic ancestries, making Brazil truly a melting pot. Beach life is, of course, full of fun and games. Food vendors take several forms. You can always count on musicians to bring the beach to life. Even sand castles can get pretty elaborate. We had just missed Rio's celebrated Carnival festivities for 2023, but we would get a taste of them later, so stay tuned. Our hotel, JW Marriott, was in a prime location on Atlantic Avenue, overlooking the beach. The dining mezzanine offered a great view. Our rooms were somewhere up here. But the lobby was our gathering place, with our unflappable trip manager, Graciela Rubin, conferring with our Brazil guide, Veronica. The next morning, the beach was empty. Slowly, the sun began to awaken. And a new day of our adventure was about to begin in Rio. As we were driving past the port of Rio de Janeiro, we were surprised to find ourselves in an art gallery. Well, not really. We were seeing the backs of warehouses that line the docks of Brazil's largest port, and wished we could slow down to study the paintings. Inside were some of Brazil's major imports and exports, including semi-finished iron and steel products, coffee, sugarcane, crude oil, soybeans, citrus fruit, silver, and other minerals that are mined in Brazil. As we left the port area, we caught sight of one of Rio's famous natural landmarks, Sugarloaf Mountain. It's an isolated hunk of granite and quartz that juts out into the Atlantic Ocean. We could climb it if we wanted to. It's only 1,300 feet above Guanabara Bay. But we preferred to crowd into a swinging cable car and hope there wasn't too much wind. Our destination is named for its resemblance to the traditional shape of concentrated refined sugar that used to be formed into a loaf. On the way up, we could catch sight of another notable mountain, the one holding the iconic statue of Christ the Redeemer. We'll save that for later. The coastal part of the city beneath us is spread out between these two landmark bookends. Looking down, we see a harbor filled with boats on Guanabara Bay. We even catch sight of Copacabana Beach, with the city behind it. Once we reached the summit, we had a great view of a heliport, probably taking tourists on a sightseeing flight. what's this? It looks like an airport, and that's exactly what it is. It's Santos Dumont Airport, Rio's second major airport with many daily flights within the country, especially between Rio and Sao Paulo. When you think about it, the physical size of Brazil is almost as big as that of the United States, so the country is dependent on good air transportation. This section of the peninsula is somewhat isolated, but very desirable. It's the Urca neighborhood. If I lived here, I think I'd want to own a yacht. A lot of people do. Now here's another extension of Sugarloaf Mountain that looks like a lot of fun. Actually, you're looking at the School of Army Physical Education, military training in a gorgeous setting. Now they're coming to take us away. What goes up must come down. Once again, Rio's fabulous beaches are on display. We know Brazil is wild about football and wildly successful, so seeing what looks like a stadium is no surprise. But wait, two of them side by side? And a third? What's going on here? Well, it seems that these are bleachers, not football stadiums, stretching for nearly half a mile to accommodate the annual Carnival parade. The bleachers lining the parade ground will hold 80,000 spectators. It's called the Samba Drome. And beyond Carnival, it's used year-round for major concert events, with performances by a who's who of the world's leading entertainers. Carnival had just ended before we arrived, but we got a backstage tour of some of the massive floats and elaborate costumes used by the 24 samba schools that were chosen to perform and compete over a 5-day period leading up to Lent. These film clips gave us a sense of the spectacle.
Communities, revealers who parade the whimsical, bewitching art of Carnival, bringing thousands of people to new checkmen and capazes. 12 samba schools make up the special group. There is a grand jury who meticulously observes the parade of every school. Each aspect of the plot is judged by 4 specialists who award scores on a scale of 1 to 10.
When we entered the warehouse used by several of the samba schools, we were dwarfed by the massive size of the floats. Some are as tall as the grandstands, and those that carry dancers are motorized. This solid-looking engine is made of very lightweight plastic, as are most of the other creations. Each samba school decides on a theme and designs its float, its costumes, and its dance choreography to support it. It takes an estimated 30,000 volunteers in 70 samba schools to bring Carnival to life each year. When the parade is over, the planning gets underway for the following year. This timeline shows what it takes to decide on a theme, design the costumes, float, and sculptures to bring it to life, compose and record music so rehearsals can begin, and deliver a winning performance in February. Then the cycle begins again. Meanwhile, there's organization work to do. Take a look at the range of costumes it takes for just one samba school to execute its vision and outfit its dancers. Costumed figures on display were both inspiring and intimidating. They had to be both lightweight and sturdy enough for hours of dancing. Now it's our turn to pick out a costume and put it on. Tony seemed genuinely pleased with his new identity. Jenny knew just how to strike a pose. Sandy's headdress was bigger than she was. They were calling me Karnak. All of us were ready for our samba lesson, and our instructor was eager to make it happen. I think we found our true calling. It's estimated that 46 million people partied in the streets of Rio in the weeks leading up to the start of Lent this year. In preparation for a Lenten sacrifice, Carnival appears to honor the spirit of overindulgence. And the samba, which evolved from African music, dance, and rhythms, brings all Brazilians together. On our way to see more of Rio de Janeiro, we passed a pretty little park honoring General Tiburcio for his heroic leadership in Brazil's 19th century war against Paraguay over disputed territory. As we made our way through beautiful parts of the central city, we were impressed with its park-like wide commercial boulevards. Both classic and modern buildings were on display. Take a look. Some of the structures were very modern. Here's one that's very classic. The historic Guanabara Palace that's now government headquarters for the state of Rio de Janeiro. As we approach Guanabara Bay, we come to the port zone of Rio, where both cargo and cruise ships dock. In preparing to host the 2016 Olympics, this area underwent major improvement, adding light rail access and several cultural attractions. The 1916 original Museum of Art of Rio got a very contemporary addition, linked by a wave-like roof overhanging the older building from the new. Just across Praça Mauer, or Flower Square, is the dramatic new Museum of Tomorrow, designed by Santiago Calatrava, the world-famous Spanish architect who created the Oculus and its World Trade Center transportation hub in New York City. Nearby, you'll also find Latin America's largest observation wheel, the Rio Star, which is about as high as a 30-story building. It takes almost 20 minutes to make a full lap and can accommodate up to 8 people in each of its 54 cabins. Now it's time to go to church, or at least drive by some notable ones. All are Roman Catholic, the dominant faith in Brazil. In fact, Brazil has the world's largest Catholic population. The Church of the Immaculate Conception dates from 1886 and reflects a neo-Gothic design. Next is Santa Luzia Church, whose origin dates back to the 1500s, but the present structure was built in 1752. The Candelaria Church you see here is imposing both in terms of its structure and its location. Construction took place from 1775 through 1898, more than a century later. The style is Renaissance. Now for something a little different. The spectacular Metropolitan Cathedral of Rio de Janeiro, which is dedicated to Saint Sebastian, the patron saint of Rio de Janeiro. Its ultra-modern design by Edgar Fonseca was inspired by Mayan pyramids. From the moment we arrived, we knew we were in for a treat. As you take a look for yourself, I'll give you some background. The new cathedral, as it's sometimes called, was built between 1964 and 1979. Inside, the diameter of the floor is 315 feet, 5 yards longer than an American football field. The height is 246 feet. The 4 stained glass windows, north, south, east, and west, stretch 210 feet from floor to ceiling. The cathedral will accommodate up to 5,000 seats, but it has standing room capacity of 20,000 people. Where would all the worshippers come from, you wonder? Well, Rio de Janeiro is home to 12 million people, almost 2/3 of whom are Roman Catholic. Here's Saint Sebastian, and he's got quite a story. According to tradition, the early Christian martyr was initially tied to a post and shot with arrows, but this didn't kill him. He was rescued and he recovered. But later he was clubbed to death for going to Diocletian and warning him of his sins. As we reflect on that story, we notice that the building across the way returns a beautiful reflection of the cathedral. What's more, that building, when paired with its twin, forms the outline of a cross at the very top. When viewed from a distance, the juxtaposition of the three buildings is unmistakable. Visitors from all over the world have come to Rio de Janeiro to ascend Mount Corcovado, a name which means hunchback in Portuguese. The south face of this big granite dome has 54 climbing paths, but we decided to join more than 300,000 annual visitors who opt to take the Corcovado Rack Railway instead. Once aboard, we climbed 2,300 feet in 20 minutes. Our objective? To stand at the feet of the gigantic statue of Christ the Redeemer. Upon arrival at the top, we could see only the backside of the statue. To view the front, we still had some climbing to do. Fortunately, we found an alternative and took an escalator up to the viewing platform. Once there, we jostled for position within the crowd. We were so close it was hard to get perspective on a 98-foot-tall figure standing on a 26-foot-tall pedestal. The arms stretch out to complete the image of a cross measuring 92 feet from fingertip to fingertip. It took a team of engineers, builders, and carvers working under French sculptor Paul Lanzowski to complete the project in 1931. The medium is reinforced concrete and soapstone. It's considered one of the new 7 wonders of the world. Away from the crowds and the sound of tourist helicopters was a tiny chapel tucked into the back of the pedestal. Christ the Redeemer's sanctuary provided a place of contemplation for the faithful. Just as this cultural icon can be seen from all parts of Rio, from here we get a bird's eye view of the central city and harbor, including Sugarloaf Mountain. And the Atlantic Ocean. Short of wandering around the famous favelas that cover the hillsides of Rio, we could get a distant view of these ghetto neighborhoods from a safe distance. There are more than 600 favelas in Rio, and about 20% of the city's population live in them. When we saw a cluster of broadcast antennas on a nearby mountaintop, we knew we were at an altitude equal to the highest point in the area. Now it's time to head back down, and our route takes us through Tijuca National Park, reminding us that we are in a tropical savanna region. Rio can get lots of heavy rain from December through March, and we were there at the end of February. But we were lucky and saw only sun in Brazil's summertime. Perhaps Christ the Redeemer was watching over us. As we passed through an older part of town, the top floor of a rather dilapidated building caught our eye. A comedy club on the top floor? Well, maybe our next visit. Meanwhile, I'm fascinated by street art, and Rio provides a rich and varied public gallery. Sure, there's the usual graffiti, but some paintings are really quite masterful. Take a look. Now we come to the work of a world-famous artist, Jorge Celeron, whose decorated staircase, Escadaria Selaron, is always crowded with visitors. You're looking at 215 steps leading up to the convent of Santa Teresa, completely covered with ceramic tiles. This unique art installation was given landmark status by the city in 2005 and was featured in Rio's successful bid for the 2016 Summer Olympics. Chilean-born artist Jorge Celeron pursued painting and sculpture in more than 50 countries around the world before settling in Rio in 1983. His home was at the top of this staircase. But in 1990, he began using fragments of blue, green, and yellow tiles, the colors of Brazil's flag, to rehab dilapidated steps outside his front door. As sometimes happens, the project grew one step at a time to cover the entire 135-yard-long staircase. It took Celeron 20 years to install all 2,000 tiles, but early on visitors took notice and began donating decorated porcelain representing their states and countries from all over the world. Tragically, Jorge Celeron died in 2013 at the age of 65. His body was found near his home with burn marks. He's said to have suffered depression. But 10 years later, the public is still visiting the site, admiring his work, and even adding to it as a way to pay their respects. Our farewell dinner was at a traditional Brazilian churrascaria, or as we would say in the United States, a Brazilian steakhouse. It was a pretty special evening, and the waiters never stopped bringing skewers of slow-roasted prime sirloin, filet mignon, chicken, lamb, and pork. I had to work hard to keep from filling up with the bountiful array of sides and salads that competed for my limited stomach space. But I managed to do justice to the churrascaria and chose Merlot as my accompanying wine. By the end of the evening, the beaches were empty. I was well fed, and I had a full appreciation for why Rio de Janeiro is called Cidade Maravilhosa, the marvelous city.